That was the first wave. It's not really a wave because it's straight. It really doesn't do anything. It's just getting used to being able to do the sets and being able to get through the training. At that point in time, my rest periods were probably 2 minutes. Not even really worried about it. Just get the work done, with the goal of between 1 to 3 to go from this. Okay guys, I don't want to spend too much time talking about the benefits of max effort training or dynamic effort training. So I'm just going to cover it really fast and then get into how I used those two methods in my training and how I still use them in my training now. So the max effort method I put back into my training a couple years ago. You know, it was all bodybuilding training for many years, but I put it back into my training not so much from a strength standpoint, but from a joint stability and structure standpoint. Is max effort training helps to develop intermuscular coordination, intramuscular coordination. Basically, it teaches you, how to coordinate, how to stabilize and move heavy weights, how to stay coordinated with those weights, as well as how to have everything to synchronize in check at this, optimally with that weight. I'm trying to explain this in the easiest context I possibly can. So lifting maximal weights teaches you how to basically lift maximal weights. It teaches you how to strain, teaches you how to do it safely, and the more you can do that, the more stable a joint will actually become, as long as you're doing it within set parameters, within exercises that are not too far outside what your scope of ability actually is, and as long as you can kind of mentally keep yourself in a place to where it's going to be of higher benefit and not as high of risk. With the degenerative issues that I have, max effort training it's an asset when used correctly. So I'll discuss how I do that and how I've done that over a period of time. It's not a matter of just working up and maxing out. It's a little bit more complex than what that is. The dynamic effort method, on the other hand, I really use that for two reasons now in my training. And I'm not speaking from a powerlifting or any other kind of strength standpoint, just from my own type of training. I use it for conditioning, and I use it to help build the maximal strength or my rate of force development. At 50 years old, I'm probably not going to increase my rate of force development by a whole hell of a lot, but I can keep it from decreasing. And I can tell when I don't move weights very fast compared to when I do move weights pretty fast. If there's a continuum, and I've explained in seminars before, strength athletes usually fall kind of somewhere in the middle, but on the far end, you're going to have people who are very, very strong, and on the other end, people who are very, very explosive. I was on the side of being very, very explosive. So when it came to max effort work, I sucked. I would get beat by people who were 200 pounds weaker than I was on certain exercises or on the main list when it came to competition day. But when it came to being in the gym, I destroyed them, or in the meet, I destroyed them. I got that backwards. I would beat them in the meet, but in the max effort exercise, they would kill me by 200 pounds while squatting 200 pounds less than I did. I was able to produce more force. They couldn't hang with me on the dynamic squat day. So I fell more on that end. So I was faster than I was strong. And that's still kind of the case now, but it's starting to come a little bit more into the center. All that aside, there's other resources on the site that you can look at that explains this in more detail. Just, search elitefts.com, dynamic effort method, elitefts.com, max effort method. You'll have more resources than you know what to do with. We've been putting shit out about this for 20 years. So the questions that I've been asked in regards to this series is how I utilize these methods for the time period that it's been there. And some people have seen some of the lifts that were posted on my Instagram, which are, you know, the heavier max effort lifts, and they just assume that they just kind of fucking came out of nowhere. And that's not the case. Every one of those was actually trained for. A couple were actually deloaded and then peaked for as well. So I need to step all the way back to the beginning. When I first started training, after, you know, basically being released to be able to train, I couldn't do dynamic work. I couldn't do max effort work, you know, with any skill whatsoever, but I still did it. So at that point in time, and this is just a quick background before I get into what I did when I started working with John. From that point, it was just a matter of, let's get to 135 to where I can do that for 8 to 10 sets of 2 on the box squat high. You know, I always squat either parallel or a couple inches high. I do that because I've had both hips replaced, and while I'm not going to say it's that it's bad to squat deeper than that, I'm also going to not say it's good. So that's where I draw the line, is it parallel. So if everything feels really good, that's where I go. If not, then I'll take it up a little bit higher. It's not like I'm going to go fucking compete in a box squat with a yoke bar. So it's all based upon just developing the absolute strength. So before getting into this, the overreaching objective of what I'm actually training for, which I never share typically with anybody, is I won't really train for anything unless I know where I want to be in 2 years. And then I work back from that. So where I want to be in 2 years, it's still something that's personal to me. You know, I'm not one that goes around, you know, sharing goals and all this other stupid shit. I keep them to myself. Then once it's achieved, I'll let you know if it's achieved. You know, if it fails, it fails, whatever. I don't think public accountability does a fucking thing. But I'm working back from 2 years. So now I'm 6 months into that, and I would say I'm where I need to be at a 6-month point. I'm not too far ahead, and I'm not behind. So there's really no need to really change, you know, what's going on at this point. So I had to get to a point to where I could just train. So being able to get to that 135, you know, across the board, like I talked about before, was important. So without that, you can't do shit. You can't recover. And being able to, you know, walk and move and be able to get the blood to circulate and to recover was an important aspect as well. So once I got to the point where I could actually begin to train, to start to train, to get ready to actually train, if that makes sense. You know, it's, to me, a starting line would be when you can actually start training for something with purpose. You know, everything before that starting line is getting you ready and getting your body ready to be able to handle the training that you're going to have to do to be able to train with purpose. So some of this that I'm going to cover crosses that line, kind of goes from shit into suck, you know, but not really getting into even good yet. So for me, what I've learned over the years, I can't just jump in and do standard West Side dynamic effort weights. I'm not in the condition to be able to do that. I can't do straight full max effort work because my joints are not in condition to do that. My body's not in condition to recover from that. So the last thing that you want to do, that I want to do, is to do heavy 3s and 5s instead of the singles. That's just fucking retarded. That's stupid. So if you can't do 1, then how is doing 5 at a high intensity going to be better on your body? It's actually worse. So when I got back into the gym, I still did the max effort work. It just wasn't heavy. It might have been 135, 185. And I'm talking squats. You know, the bench, you know, I used the pink bar until I could bench 200 pounds. And then I kind of moved on from there. So it's still there. It's just controlling the tempo and controlling the rate to be able to know how much pain you can, train in that's still comfortable. So once I got through that crap, then the first series that I went through that was actually kind of worth a fuck was using a yoke bar on a 3-week wave for 8 sets of 2. Now, I wasn't in any position to be able to actually waive percentages, because percentages don't matter when you suck so bad that you're just shit. It makes no difference whatsoever. So I found a weight that was comfortable, that I was able to use, that was hard but not too hard. So say, you know, for those people that use RPEs, let's say an RPE of like 4 or 5. You know, for me at the time it was 275. For that 3-week wave. And the reason I use the yoke bar is I cannot get under a straight bar. So that's what I used. Now, that was the first wave. It's not really a wave because it's straight. It really doesn't do anything. It's just getting used to being able to do the sets and being able to get through the training. At that point in time, my rest periods were probably 2 minutes. Not even really worried about it. Just get the work done, with the goal of between 1 to 3 to go from this being kind of maybe say an RPE of 6 to being an RPE of 2. So by the time we're here, it's easy, it's simple. It really isn't that hard. And then go through and repeat again at 2 reps for the next phase. With the same weight, except this time going 8, 12, 15, and I think on this week I actually went up to 20 sets. So I'm staying with the same weight, but I'm increasing the, what I call volume. It's also increasing the workload, but to me volume is sets times reps. Workload is sets times reps, with putting the weight in there as well to come up with the total workload. So the whole goal here was just to increase the volume. While it did increase the workload, that wasn't necessarily the objective here, because the weight's really not heavy enough to make that big of a difference. The objective here was to be able to go from 2 minutes down to 30 to 45 seconds. I do think this session here was one of the sessions that was filmed when John came out for a follow-up, because there I did a couple of the sets without even racking the weight. From there, this is all dynamic again. Now, from this standpoint, I was at a place where I could actually waive the weight. So it was 275, 315, 365, and then we started to use chain, 4 chain per side. Again, 8 sets of 2, consistently down through there. So now it's adding the accommodating the resistance. Now at this point, this is basically building the conditioning, building the base. Now I'm trying to bring back in the explosive force that I need to be able to do the heavier max effort work, or to be able to push through the heavier max effort work. At the end of this phase here, I started to get knee issues. I started to have problems with my knee, and that wasn't really too big of a deal. That was basically just skipping the dynamic and max effort work for the next week, going back to things that I know help stabilize the knee, which is more hamstring work, seated leg, seated calf raises, and TKEs, which have been 3 things that have always worked for me. I'm not saying it's going to work for you. More than likely, it probably won't work for you. But those are things that immediately worked for me, as well as backing down a little bit. And I knew at the time while it is fucked up because it's bone on bone, it wasn't something that was a major issue. It was just hurt. So it just needed a little recovery, because at this point in time, I haven't listed the max effort work yet. But at that point in time, there was a lot of workload. Looking back on squatting basically twice a week, which is something that I haven't done for a very long time. So once I got through there, I went into rotating different bars and different implements based upon strength. So each dynamic wave would increase in workload without having to change the volume. This will make sense here in a minute. So the first was a front squat harness, which I found I could do, and I fucking sucked at it bad. So I think week 1 was like 185 for 8 sets of 2 with, I don't know, 2 to 4 chain. Usually it's always 4 chain, but I think that was so bad that all I really wanted the chain for was to help stabilize the bar, or to help track the bar, to make it a little bit easier for me to stabilize and keep it moving in the direction that I wanted. The next week, I think I was able to go maybe 245 and then 275 at that 8 sets of 2, 8 sets of 2, and the same chain. So the thing, and I'm not going to do the math here, the thing to keep in mind is if you calculate this out, 185 for 8 sets of 2 reps, and you figure out what that total workload is. Again, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to throw some bullshit number out there as an example. Let's say we're going, here I am trying to figure it out. 400, 4 times 8. Let's say, 3,200 pounds. Just, again, don't bust my ass on the math. I'm not fucking trying to figure this out for real. But any 32, 34, 3,600 pounds as far as workload. All right, that's where my concern was on the workload, because I'm coming back from kind of learning a lesson there that I can't push that hard, that frequently, and need to build it up slower. From this, I went to the yoke bar, which I'm way stronger at the yoke bar than I am the front squat harness. So with this one, it went 275, 315, 365, and the chain's kind of irrelevant because they always stay the same. Now, so 3 times 2, 6 times. So now let's say we're going, 4,800, 5,000, 5,500 workload. Okay, so I'm increasing the workload throughout each phase. The next one was the Spyder Bar, which I'm actually the best at. Like 365, 405, 455, and pretty much everything the same there. 4 times 2 is 800, 8 times 6. So now we're going 64. Probably close to 7,000 before we get there. Workload. Now here's the important part of this is if I was to take my 1 rep max here, my 1 rep max here, and my 1 rep max here, and break these phases out based upon a percentage, which I didn't do because I went on feel. I've been doing this long enough. I kind of know what it is. it may have looked like 50, 55, 60%. This, 50, 55, 60%. This, 50, 55, 60%. Percentages when you're speaking strength training is an expression of intensity. You know, in bodybuilding, intensity is how fucking hard you can train, hardcore or whatever it is. But in strength and conditioning, the percentage is an expression of intensity. So going through this whole entire phase, what you see is the intensity stayed the same for each one of these 3-week waves, but yet the workload changed significantly. It waved big time, almost double from the first 3 weeks to the second 3 weeks, while keeping the volume and intensity the same. That's where specialty bars can come in and help tremendously if you're a strength athlete, but it can help tremendously if you're also really fucked up, because you're training the stimulus, you're changing the joint stimulus, you're changing the muscle stimulus, you're changing everything that's around that to allow everything to recover better. The problem that I had here, it was all yoke bar. So that stimulus was all the same week after week after week after week. Here, it changed every 3 weeks. So I was able to get through that without fucking totally destroying myself or having any problems with that. So that's kind of a general outline of how the dynamic work laid out. Now that I'm in condition, I don't need, this was necessary. You know, if I could do it over again, I probably would have cut that part out. This was necessary because my conditioning sucked. So I needed something to be able to drive the volume up. The problem is it was driving the workload up too much. So on this one, you know, looking back, I probably should have descended the load throughout the weeks to be able to try to help control the workload, stay under control, so my body was going to be better able to recover. That's the dynamic work. The max effort work won't take as long to be able to go through. Okay, the max effort work is going to be a lot easier and quicker to get through than the dynamic effort work, because it really doesn't take as much thought and planning and putting it together as what the dynamic effort work does. I've been doing this conjugate shit for 20 some years. So when I build out a cycle, as I talked before, starting 2 years out back through, I may have the dynamic work planned out for the whole two years. The max effort work I don't have planned out at all. You know, it's basically 100% auto-regulated and auto-driven from that standpoint. So I'll just cover some of the basic aspects that I used for this phase. Keep in mind, again, this is not training for a powerlifting meet. It's just answering the questions that are related to this fixing Dave Tate thing that's been going on. And this will change, you know, moving forward as well. But the basics that I'm going to talk about essentially are not going to change. So with the max effort exercise, it changes every week. I fucked up a couple times and tried to use the same exercises for 2 weeks, and I paid a price each time. You know, I tried to do a single 1 week or a triple and a single, or, you know, try to beat records 2 weeks in a row, and every single fucking time it drove me into the ground. I couldn't recover. To me, the max effort work has to change every single week. These exercises I've been doing for 10, 15, some for 20 years. If I'm not proficient at doing them technically, then something's really fucking wrong with me. The only time I would ever consider anybody doing a max effort, and I use that term loosely, for more than 1 week in a row is if their technique just sucks. And at that point in time, I wouldn't say that that's even really max effort, because max effort, just the word max effort being singular, specifies that it's 1 rep max. So the whole intention of that is to be able to strain to address the intermuscular coordination, extramuscular, being able to learn how to strain. Let's just keep it simple. Being able to learn how to strain and also being able to learn how to strain and think, which is kind of a secondary thing from that, and the joint stability and the other things that I talked about. Again, you can search elitefts.com, max effort exercise or max effort method, and you'll get a ton more shit. I don't want to waste my time with that. The exercises that I selected were based upon exercises I can do. And in the last segment that I was talking about, it was all about the squat. I didn't speak about the bench. You get the idea. Concept's the same, just different exercises that are being used. The max effort stuff for the bench, I have more variety than I do with the squat because I can't put a straight bar on my back. But I can still do max effort work with the Spyder bar, with the yoke bar, with the front squat harness, kind of. That's one where I'm technically very, very inefficient. I suck. So my max effort work, if you want to call it that, on that movement is when I begin to technically break down, then I'm out. So that kind of got thrown in there as what many people would call a deload, because there's no way I'm going to actually really be able to strain because I'm technically going to break down before I can actually strain through anything. The Spyder bar and the yoke bar were used predominantly, and I fluctuated on how I use them based upon straight weight plus chain, some chain, a shit ton of chain, a little bit of chain, bands. It changed all the time. Every week it was something different, and if it needed to back down, it went to the front squat harness, or it was a trap bar deadlift that was in there a couple times, and I think one time was a straight bar deadlift. So just the key thing is the movement changed all the time. That allowed me to be able to recover from the movement and to be able to handle the movement. Now, as far as how hard I was able to push or tempo, let's talk about tempo first. During the beginning part of the phase, I knew I wasn't going to be able to eccentrically control the weight very well. I was too fucking weak. So I purposely slowed the tempo down. That makes me weaker. So let's say I could have been able to squat 600 pounds with the safety squat bar. If I'm doing it half the tempo, then that automatically drops to 400 really quick. So then I still get that max effort straining, but it's being controlled because the tempo's lower. So I started the whole phase or the whole training with a slower tempo and built that tempo up when my speed work started to allow me to be able to produce the force, and the accessory training was allowing me to be able to stabilize the weight. Whenever you're trying to move heavy weight or lift heavy shit, you first have to be able to stabilize the force, then absorb the force, and then produce the force. So those were the things that I was working on there, was being able to stabilize the force. You know, if it was a squat on the pick, making sure I was holding for a couple extra seconds than I normally would, and then doing the movement, building the torso to be able to absorb that force. A lot of the exercises later in the programming that John had in there were also to help build and to absorb that force as well. And the bench, the same thing, holding it for a little bit longer at the beginning, at the end, to be able to take care of that aspect, controlling the tempo to help, you know, absorb the force. So that I meant stabilize the force in the last section I was talking about when you held it out. When I could stabilize and absorb, then I started trying to really fucking apply force with the max effort stuff when I stood up. When I got to that point, I had to be more selective on the movements that I chose, and because the weights were going to be heavier. Reverse bands were another option that I used a lot of throughout this. So there, with all the max effort work, accommodating resistance was used pretty much every time, and that was to take the force out of the bottom, you know, and increase it more towards the top. That works very well for me with chains. It doesn't work so well for me when it comes to bands. Bands beat the shit out of me. So it's, you know, my future with bands is to be determined. But with that aside, that's the exercise selection. So there's no way I can sit here and say, do this, do this, do this, do this, because first off, this isn't about you. It's about what I was doing. And secondly, your max effort exercises, if you're doing a conjugate program, you just need to be proficient at it. That's it, be good at the movement. If you're not good at the movement, stick with the same 5 or 6 movements until you're good at those movements. just rotate those through, then expand. I mean, there's thousands of max effort exercises you can do. The key thing with the max effort exercise, and I think a lot of people get this a little confused, it isn't the fucking PR. It's straining and learning how to strain. Getting your body to strain is what's gonna make your absolute strength go up. That's the whole fucking idea here, is to get the absolute strength to go up. That straining is what's important, not the actual fucking weight on the bar. Good and bad days can change the weight on the bar, but the straining can still stay constant. So you still get the benefit of the max effort work. You can hit a PR and absolutely destroy the PR and never strain, yet you negated the purpose of the max effort work, because say it only ended up being 80%. I'm not saying you should fail. I'm saying that the weight should fall somewhere between 90, 95%, maybe a little bit higher, and you should strain. How to warm up for that? For me, it's going to be different than anybody else. I base the warm-ups on how the first set feels with just the bar. Sometimes I got to use the bar for 4 or 5 sets. Then I'll go whatever the quarter or a plate, whatever the lowest jump I can make is, and I stick at that weight. So if it's safety squat bar or yoke bar, it may be the bar for 2 or 3 sets. It may be the bar with a plate for 3 or 4 sets. I don't go up that next jump until I feel like my body's ready to go up that next jump. There's sometimes I may use 135 or 225 for 5 or 6 sets before I go up. Then I'll go to 3 plates and then 4 plates. Now things feel really good. Sometimes I may jump from 3 to 5 plates. And if somebody's watching me from the outside looking in, they're gonna say, oh shit, he just made a huge jump, especially on the top end. But they fail to realize I may have done 25 fucking sets to get to that. I just don't need that weight in between at that point, because I'm primed, I'm ready, the weight's good, it's still within reason, and it's not so heavy that I'm gonna miss on that jump. You do still wanna build some kind of workload and work capacity with the max effort work, but it's a balance. You know, it's like I said, I've been doing it for a long time, so that's kind of the philosophy that went behind the max effort training. With the bench, the same type of thing. It just was floor press, shoulder saver press. I think I did a board press, you know, neutral grip bar, you know, different stuff like that, but the same general philosophy of changing through there. The one thing that I was asked as far as, you know, what made this harder for me from a programming standpoint is when working with John, I was pretty much given the parameters to, you can control the max effort work, you can control the dynamic work. And to be honest, I probably wouldn't have released those over to anybody else anyhow, because as I said in the very first part of this, I'm under the bar and I know my body well to know what needs to be done, you know, and sometimes you just need to pull out and not do that exercise that day. I don't believe that's something that can be programmed. I think that's something that you have to learn how to auto-regulate yourself over a period of time. And then once you know it, you have to trust it. The thing that fucked me up, if there was anything that was out there, is I couldn't focus on the weak points that I felt were there based upon the feedback that I'm getting from how I feel doing the max effort work and the dynamic work. You know, throughout the training phases so far, my hamstrings are fucking weak. You know, I can tell that. I can tell that because when the weights got, you know, super maximal, when they really started to get up in there, it was harder for me to sit down than it was to stand up. And that's not typical. To me, that's indicative of my hamstrings just fucking sucking. And my normal course of action would be put in more hamstring work, put it in the front of the workout, put it in the back of the workout. Usually it's in there at all time. So I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because, you know, what John was finding were other weak points that had to be addressed that aren't in the program to be able to drive my reverse band squat with the Spyder bar, because who really gives a fuck about that? You know, so that was a little frustrating from that standpoint. So that was a part that I missed in the very beginning of this, because I would feel these lists and be like, okay, I have to fucking do this, but I couldn't. You know, I had to do, you know, fucking glute bridges or whatever the hell was in the program that I was supposed to do. So Could I have ended up doing heavier weights on the reverse band Spyder Bar high box squat? Yes, most definitely. Does it matter? No, it doesn't matter, because it's still about just straining. It's not the weight, you know, it's the straining in the process of that. So that's really all I got for the max effort stuff.